Hello ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. Is it too late to start Classic World of Warcraft? Here we are just cresting the start of Phase 3 and at the halfway mark of the content released for Classic WoW, and I've heard this commented on my videos, people wondering, is it just too late to start now? Am I too far behind the curve? It's an interesting subject and I've quite a lot to say about it actually, so let's have a little talk about it. First of all, what are the concerns? What issues are perceived that would harm or impair your game experience for a player starting now? 6 bumps down the line from release. Let's address those, then we can look at how those things are affected in game today. Number 1, it takes so long to get level 60. This is very true, there's no doubt about it. Leveling and exploring the world is an integral part of the game, and it's no secret it's a marathon, not a sprint, despite what you may have heard about during release. Personally, it took me around 8 days played to get level 60, and I just did standard questing and a few dungeons, nothing special. Saying that, 60 as a goal is fine, but keep your mind on the now, where your character is today. If you keep looking too far ahead, it can spoil the game for you, and we'll talk more about once you hit level 60 a bit later. The second issue, I'm so far behind in gear now, it's another valid concern. In Classic, gear decides a lot. The difference between a fresh level 60 and somebody even in just Molten Core gear is day and night. And as you may know, the gearing system is much more linear in Classic, where you really do need to at least do some of each raid tier to be able to gear up for the next. So the later you wait, the worse off you are, right? Well, not so much, and I'll leave that there for now, but it's not as big a deal as you may make it out to be, trust me. Number 3, if I roll a PvP server now, I'm just going to get ganked all day, it's not going to be any fun. Believe me, even during the first few weeks of the game, you didn't need someone on the enemy faction to be level 60 to gank you. I'm going to lay it down here, world PvP is not fair. The majority of the time you'll die, it'll be somebody taking advantage of you being lower health or lower level. There is however an incentive to gank for honour in order to rank in the PvP system, which I've done a video on if you need to understand why people do that. Now this incentive isn't really there on Alliance, but it is on Horde for reasons we will see later, and as an Alliance player in later game zones, yes, you will be ganked more frequently than Horde, but not excessively so at this point. Number 4. Finding groups for content is going to be a pain now that everybody is done with leveling. It will certainly take you longer for sure to get a group than it did initially, however that's not to say there aren't many people leveling alt accounts now, which incidentally is something many people look into doing at Endgame. Depends on your class too, of course, right? Everyone wants tanks. And number 5, I'm not going to be able to find a decent guild to raid. Not true, guilds are constantly recruiting, be it for social members or those who aspire to raid one day. Even with new raids coming out, this will remain the case, as I will talk about shortly. So those are the 5 key concerns I believe a new player may have. First of all, let me tell you what the good news is for a player starting now, and then the not so good news, okay? So the good first. I want to start off with this, which is perhaps the most important thing that I will say during this video. If you take one thing away, I want it to be this. World of Warcraft Classic is far more of a sandbox style of game than any other. There is way more content to do during the leveling process than there is at endgame. Many of the people who zoomed to 60 and geared up in a few weeks aren't playing anymore because they blasted through a part of the game meant to be played at a slower pace. Once they hit endgame, they found they burnt through everything there was to do, they call the game bad and quit. You know that meme with the bicycle? Actually, I'm just going to show on screen here now. This is how I imagine people who quit because they completed all the content in a month. Don't worry about not being level 60, if you enjoy the game it'll happen eventually. If not, you can say you came and saw what you wanted to. Starting with 2 gathering professions such as mining or herbalism plus skinning is even better than it was on launch. With less people leveling overall, there are far fewer low tier crafting materials coming into the game, which means people have to fork out a bit of a premium for them. Especially things like solid stone for sapper charges from mining, or swift thistle from mage royal or briarthorn from herbalism used in thistle tea. This means you should stand a better chance of getting enough gold, ideally around 100 by the time you are level 40, so you can get your mount and enjoy that big speed boost. Next up, I wouldn't worry too much about lacking gear, it will come with time for sure. I would advise however to pick a specialisation when you're hitting the late level 50s so you can start saving towards what you want to perform as in PvP or PvE content, rather than having several sets hanging about that are all made up of random level 35 green items. Focus on building up at least one solid item set. You can always off-spec roll later on down the line. Saying that, it will take longer now to pick up a decent set of gear due to less dungeon running. If you do want to roll on a PvP server, at least it's not Phase 2 anymore. In case you didn't know, Phase 2 launched with the ranking and honour system without battlegrounds. This made Outdoors pretty much an open world battleground, which sounds really cool at first, but it made going anywhere a real chore. You could spend 20 minutes getting inside Blackrock Mountain at peak times. Well, at least as Alliance anyway, who are outnumbered on the vast majority of PvP servers. Speaking of servers being 6 months in, servers have now stabilised, meaning you aren't at risk of picking somewhere that's going to end up the way of Flamelash or Luciferon on the Alliance side. And yes, this happened because of Phase 2 and how unbearable world PvP ganking was. In terms of picking a server, balance and PvP don't really go together. There are, however, advantages to both Horde and Alliance. As Horde, you're less likely to get ganked in world PvP, and as Alliance, well, your battleground queues are shorter, which isn't really affected by being on a PvP server per se, but there you go. In terms of actually picking a server, you want somewhere with a higher population for sure. There are no cross-realm dungeons or raiding. Also, your server's economy will be better and there will just be more players to group with or get to know. So check this out by either just looking at servers which show as high population on the realm list, or by looking at the website ironforge.pro, which lists demographics in a number of different ways. Now, it's important to note that this site pulls its data from Warcraft logs, so it's not indicative of the total player base, just those more actively engaging in endgame content. Saying that, I believe it's still about the best indicator we have to assessing a server's Horde to Alliance population, so take it with a grain of salt. Finally, guilds in Classic are constantly recruiting. There's just no downside not to be doing so. You can bring up to 40 people for most raids, and 20 for Temple of AQ and ZG. A linear gearing system is hardly a bar to entry. That same system makes it attractive for pugs and guilds to reclear lower tier raid content for items. If you put some effort into your gear upon hitting 60, even in blues, you'll get a spot for the lower tier raids when you hit level cap. Both pugs and guilds will be running Molten Core to the end of Naxxramas just for bindings of the Windlord alone, you can bet that. So a guild and raid shouldn't be a problem to find if you want to do it. So those are the things that I think are actually in your favour as a new player. Now for the not so good news. There had to be some, right? Honestly though, much of this stuff isn't just affecting you because you are a newer player, but has been and will continue to affect everyone. It's just part of the game, and not something you will grow out of given time. PvP. As mentioned, PvP servers by and large are not balanced. There are simply more Horde than Alliance players overall. This means rolling a PvP server as Alliance, you are putting yourself against the odds, shall we say. There being far more Horde has had a very large effect on Battlegrounds. There were some changes to shake up the Battleground meta recently, and the result overall was mixed. Horde queues for Alterac Valley at the moment can be 40 minutes to an hour, even at peak times. Warsong Gulch 10 to 20 minutes. As of now, we don't have Arathi Basin yet, which is due to come in Phase 4, which is likely going to be 2.5 to 3 months after this video. And I think the queue time will be something a bit in between Warsong Gulch and Alterac Valley. Also, you should know there is a meta for grinding out honour for PvP ranks. Horde Warsong Gulch queues have gone down because there are many Alliance pre-mades in there currently, since pre-mading Alterac Valley got nerfed. So despite the shorter queues, you are more likely to lose. In Alterac Valley the queues are far longer for Horde, but honestly, and I would love to see some stats on this, it feels like Horde wins about 99 out of 100 Alterac Valley games. And I don't even feel like I'm exaggerating saying this. Anyway, I don't want to go on and on about PvP, but as of today that is an idea of how it looks. Next up, finding groups for dungeons during your leveling will take longer. Feels kind of obvious, I'll give it a mention though. Personally, I'm still leveling alts myself, and honestly, you can put a group together pretty fast if you step up and start looking yourself. Many people just can't be bothered to start the search often. You may also notice that people are just opting into dungeon cleave groups, which are basically mages AoEing a dungeon down and resetting, or people selling boosts on their main for gold, which is just people trying to get to level 60 as soon as possible. I wouldn't really recommend it for your first time playing through, even if you can afford it, but that one's up to you whether or not you want to try it. Also at endgame, trying to get a tank for a dungeon is actually the real final boss of Classic. To be honest, this has been an issue since very, very early on, not something new. But most of the time now, unless there's some gold game for the tank, you basically aren't going to get one. This is also partly because warriors don't really have access to many decent gold farms, so essentially they sell their services in returns for items from dungeon. In fact, it reminds me of a certain quote from J. Allen Brack.
Remember when you had to spam cities and say, need a tank, need a tank, need a tank during the Burning Crusade days? You don't remember that because now you just push a button that says go to the dungeon. You don't want to do that.
It's funny how things work out, isn't it? Finally, about the endgame, there isn't that much of it. If you're coming from retail, there's none of the repeatable stuff, the Mythic Plus, arenas, collection logs, so on and so forth. It's raid, PvP, gold farm, or level and alt. So believe me, there's no real rush to get there. So those are the bad for me. Now for the sort of in-between grey areas, ones that only you can say how much they affect you. You've missed the hype train. Honestly, this might be a good thing in some ways, but the initial buzz around the game has gone for sure, with many streamers and content creators moving on to the next big thing. Saying that, those still about are likely the ones in for the long haul, and servers are still very active, indicating that Classic will retain a large player base. Remember how we were told a medium server is larger than even the biggest server was in vanilla. If what I can see logging in today is anything to go by, the game is far from on the edge of collapse, and will only go up with further patches coming out. Also, don't forget that one day we may just get the Burning Crusade. Not confirmed, I believe it's likely though, so you can bet you want to be level 60 if that day comes, right? I find it really funny when people claim Classic is dead or World of Warcraft is dead, just as they've been doing for 15 years, and last time I checked, 150,000 people were watching Limit get the world first in the most recent raid on retail. Whenever I log in the afternoon or evening, in Ironforge, Stormwind, or even Orgrimmar, it's buzzing. Dead game indeed. People saying this are almost always just bored or frustrated with the game, but just can't move on for some reason. They feel just need to iterate it again and again because they want to be right. At the end of the day, it's a game, right? Not something you should plan your life around if it's just something you can look into in your spare time. What's worth it is different for everybody. But I would keep the things I've mentioned in consideration when making a choice, not whether to just play the game, but where you should play it on what server and how you should play it. So, is it too late to start Classic World of Warcraft? No, I don't think so. In fact, I think many of the guys still leveling up are having a better time than those who rush to 60 to gear up. I think it's well worth a look into, whether it's for your slice of nostalgia or something new. I think I can still recommend giving it a go. Anything you'd like to say to a new player to the game who's trying it for the first time, you can pop it in the comments below. As always, I do hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. If you like what you see, give the video a like and subscribe, as there's plenty more to come. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Take care. Bye.